Hello, people. One of the topics that often comes up at Maze is how do you tell your child about their condition and how do you then process that as a family? Now, I have a series of books that I've discovered that I share with families. I've got one here, My Brother Has a Thing by Rachel Jackson, that explains for any sibling about their differences. And so I contacted Rachel and asked if she would meet me to talk about the books that she has written, The Thing, My Brother Has a Thing, and It's a Panda Thing, to tell me about the books, the reasons for writing them, and her own story about sharing this information with her child. Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
Thanks for agreeing to speak to me today. So for those people who are watching, can you maybe just introduce yourself and tell us something about your family?
Yes, that would be great. My name is Rachel Jackson, and I have two boys. One who's just turned 8 years old, and the other who is 10. My eldest, Leo, has a formal diagnosis, which I always find slightly uncomfortable, of autism, and my youngest shows signs of some sensory issues, but nothing that you would take to any kind of diagnostic assessment process. And we live in the Ipswich area with my husband, Brad, who is South African.
So Rachel, I have a copy of one of your lovely books here. My Brother Has a Thing is the one that I've got. I've got all of them. So you've written a number of these books. Can you just tell us a little bit about your reasons for writing the books?
Yes, I spent a long time talking with Leo about the way that he behaves slightly differently. He does things differently. He thinks differently. He behaves differently, and we've always talked about it as a kind of a thing. It's a kind of a thing that he does in a quite a light-hearted, easy way. And when I started to get to a point where I was trying to explain what that thing might be, all I found were lots of books that were about autism or Asperger's or something that had a name. And many of them I found myself turning pages over or even ripping pages out because they weren't relevant. They were either too extreme or the language didn't fit. And a lot of them were very Americanized, so there was lots of American language. But more than anything, I found the sense that I got from those books is that they were aimed at trying to describe autism to neurotypical children who perhaps had an autistic child in their classroom. They didn't feel like they came for the child with autism. So I wanted something that was from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And one evening I went to my mum's house and I was expressing this frustration, and my mum casually said, "Why don't you write one?" So I went home and wrote one. And that's where The Thing came from and the journey began. And the second book, the one that you're showing, that My Brother Has a Thing, came as a result of my youngest son making a quite obvious complaint that he didn't have a book written about him and he wanted a thing as well. So it went to there.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you were thinking about your family's needs and how you could best explain that. And you're right that, lots of written materials sort of outline autism as if it's something that needs to be corrected or changed. Yeah. It's something deviant or wrong. And it's not, is it? It's just like you say, it's a thing that some people have that just means that they think differently and act differently to the rest of the neurotypical population. So I love that you did that. And I obviously love your books and I share them with families at Maze too. But it's obvious from reading it and talking to you and knowing you also that you have a little bit more knowledge and a bit more of a background around this topic. So I just wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your educational background and what drew you into this field.
Well, I studied psychology because I was continually unpicking what was happening in my family, and I did a degree in psychology, and towards the end of that degree I became fascinated in autism, and I was studying Uta Frith's theory of mind, which I suspect is still quite a prevalent theory of mind, although at the time I think it was quite a fresh-faced way of looking at it. And I spent a whole term, I think, with children who had been diagnosed with autism, trying to get them to do jigsaws. and we were doing jigsaws in various different ways to explore theory of mind and how their brains wanted to separate things out rather than looking at a whole. So there were all kinds of bits and pieces that I was doing. And then from my degree in psychology, I went on and have spent the last 10 years working as a consultant, training people in things like emotional intelligence, leadership, resilience. And again, I'd be standing in front of groups of adults talking to them about how the brain worked and how emotions worked, and realised that I wasn't doing that with my children, and that some of that language could translate quite easily to help Leo understand how his brain worked differently, and for him to get a handle on his emotions.
Yeah, I think that's great that so often happens in life for people generally, that something that they've known about in the past and something that happens within their personal life, somehow they merge. And it just means that actually what you bring, particularly Rachel, and for people who have that experience, is that you bring a particularly unique insight that can be super helpful to other people. And I know your books have been really helpful. Within the maze groups, we often talk about telling your child when you discover that they have autism or any kind of additional need, actually, the point at which to tell them and how to tell them. And I just wondered if you might share some of your reflections on that process that you've been through about sharing that diagnosis with your child. Actually, I prefer to use the word confirmation because, as I was saying before, the word diagnosis implies that it's something wrong that needs a medical intervention, and that's not the case, although that is the terminology that's used. But how you describe that to your child and to your family?
For a start, in our family, it's always been part of the conversation. We've always been, I tend to talk about emotions and always have done it. It's difficult to know whether I studied psychology because I did that or whether I do that because I studied psychology. I don't know which came first. So it's always been an open conversation about how people behave and how they behave differently. I don't know that there was a specific moment where I opened that conversation with Leo. It's always been a case that when he did something that was a bit different, we'd talk about what that different looked like, and it would be like, you do things differently. There's a thing about you that you do that, and that's where the thing terminology came from, as I said. I don't know that there's ever been one conversation, and I think that's the really important thing for me, that when we're talking about telling our child, it's like we've been carrying this burden, this secret almost that we hold really. It makes a big deal to us. It's something that we've all been working with and trying to get our heads around during their childhood. And we assume that we're handing over some big piece of news. And actually, I think I realised with Leo, when I tried to have one of those conversations and he was a bit, yeah, and that it wasn't a big deal for him. It wasn't some big revelation that was going to make his life different. It was just a piece of missing information that gave him some more understanding of himself.
Yeah, I think that's true, that it can just feel like such an enormous burden. I know so many parents go through the process of seeing a paediatrician, having the assessment, and then coming away with confirmation that, yes, your child is on the autism spectrum, and feeling like they've been given this very huge, heavy burden to carry around with them, that somehow they need to offload it. And trying to find the opportune moment to do exactly that feels like such a heart-wrenching, anxiety-provoking process to go through. And often, like yourself, parents are discovering that they probably have already been starting to have those conversations, but they just didn't realise it.
Yeah. All you're effectively doing is providing the same kind of information that you would be providing to any neurotypical child to help them build a sense of who they are. And actually, you're having exactly the same conversations with somebody who has a diverse need or a different way of thinking, to just reflect back to them. And I think that's why I found it more natural, because I do that in my work every day. I'm helping adults to see, putting a mirror in front of them and helping them to see how they behave and the impact they have. I'm doing the same with both of my children, one from a neurotypical perspective, one from an autism perspective, but it's the same journey. And it's not this big one conversation. It's continual drip feed. I think the one bigger conversation that we did have is when I had the first draft of the book, And the link that I've shared with you is Leo reading the book to himself. And that was I think that was a tear-jerking moment for me, because he recognized himself and he was okay with that, because the book is all about being okay with whatever this thing is. So I think that was really wonderful to see that come full circle.
Yeah, I watched that little video, and I too felt really emotional. I'll share that with the video when I post this up. But one of the other things I wondered if you'd just tell us a little bit about is, when you're out and about and your son is behaving in a, what we know is a typically autistic way, but causes attention to be drawn to him by other people, other children, other adults. How do you manage that situation?
I think in the early days, probably the same as most neurotypical parents, I'd do the whole, we need to take this away and make it go away somewhere. And I found it really, really uncomfortable to manage. Leo isn't a shy and retiring autism version. He is an in your face. He would run into people and talk to them. So I had to come up with a solution quite quickly. And I think I would often quietly have a conversation either with the parent or with actually the children that were there, to just say Leo has autism, or Leo has a different way of doing things. His intent, and I would always try and say he's not trying to be annoying, or he's not trying to be loud, or he's not trying to be threatening. He just does things differently, and I would provide that information. I think after I wrote the book, there was a particular moment that I came to where I found him in the park playing with some. I think they were young teenagers, and they'd asked him where he went to school, because they obviously hadn't seen him at our local school, because he now goes to Cambridge. And he said, "Oh, I go to school in Cambridge." And they said, "Oh, why do you go to school in Cambridge?" And I waited, and I thought, well, the thing I would say is because I'm autistic and I go to a school for children with autism. And he chose not to. He said, "I go to school in Cambridge because it's a great school and I love going there," and didn't mention it at all. And I thought to myself, this isn't mine anymore. This isn't my story to tell. It's his story to tell, and to choose whether he wants to tell it and in what way. We had another incident literally this weekend when I went out into the park, and an adult approached me and said, "I just wanted to tell you, I was so impressed with the way that Leo handled himself. He came up to me and he said, 'Your two boys have been squirting a water pistol at me,' and I asked them to stop, and I asked them to stop twice. And I wanted to just come and tell you, because I'm autistic and sometimes I find it difficult to handle my emotions and I get angry, and I didn't want that to happen, so I've come to tell you." And I just went, oh, and those moments where you just think it's his and he knows how to handle it. And it was
that's the dream, isn't it? For every parent, what we really want is for our children to be clear about what their needs are, to understand that, to be okay with it, and to be mature enough to be able to go and have that kind of a conversation with other people. That's when you think, okay, I did my job well there. So well done for that.
Oh, yeah, made it. And I'm sure that won't be the end of the story, because he will still struggle, but he's starting to struggle consciously and comfortably with his own needs. And I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a big part of the process, isn't it? So it's great. You can see him on his way with managing it and finding his place in the world. But one of the topics that often comes up with the Maze parents at our groups is, how do you as a parent cope when you've got other people watching and being very judgmental?
I think it varies. I think when it's just me and Leo, then it's much more, it's much easier to respond and either exit or manage him, or manage myself with the fact that things may or may not happen and I will have to handle it. It's more difficult when I have my youngest, Benjamin, because he has his own needs and he doesn't want to be exited. He doesn't want to have to deal with his brother's behaviour. And he will often say to other children, "Don't mess with my brother," because if he gets angry. So we have an extra dynamic. And with my husband, it's even more difficult, because I mentioned he's South African. So he has a big thing about behaving appropriately in public. So public situations, we all as a family still find difficult. I think what's helped me over time is to recognize that, much like a neurotypical child having a tantrum, the most important person is the safety and the health and the emotional stability of that person, and that's my role. And I think the more I can come back to that space and know that I'm dealing with him, the better. But I still come away from it shaky, I must admit. And it's a continual cycle. Some days you will be glowing with pride, and some days you are struggling with almost a grieving process, because you're grieving the child who would normally behave brilliantly and just isn't today for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle, and it will never change, will it? Because other people's reactions can be really, really hurtful. Yeah. And like you say, the only thing that's under your control is your actions and what you do. And in that moment that the only person that can help and support your child to get them back to, calm and under control and everything's okay again is you. Mm-hmm. So, the best thing really, isn't it, is to, as much as you possibly are able to, just try to block out those tut-tuts and, the looks of judgment from other people, and just focus on, getting everybody calm and happy. Because at the end of the day, I always say this, who do you care more about, strangers who are tutting you or your own child? And it's a no-brainer, isn't it, really?
I think the other thing that I always try and think about is that my biggest dream for Leo is that he manages to get to a point where he can actively self-manage, so that he knows what happens if he gets overtired. He knows what happens if he needs hunger being satisfied. We have a Benjamin arriving. Thank you. He knows what needs to happen when he's angry and stressed, so he knows how to self-manage. Now, if I'm demonstrating appalling self-management in front of him in those crises moments, if I'm going, everything's all over the place, how can I help him? So I try and keep that front of mind, and it's really, really not easy. It really isn't easy, and I find that continual process where one day you can manage it beautifully, and the next day you feel like there's a child melting down who needs you desperately, and you can't find the resources. So I think you just have to go with those days and get through them and go through the recovery process with him.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true what you said, and you have to give yourself a break, that we're all only human. And some days we've had a better night's sleep, and some days we're feeling in a better mood for whatever reason, and other days we're tired or we're stressed, and that will affect how well we cope with those things. But at the end of the day, the more angry and agitated we get as parents, you can bet your bottom dollar the children will always surpass us in every single way when it comes to stress, noise, anxiety, anger. So remaining calm and composed is really the best thing you can do, and often the absolute hardest thing that you can do. Absolutely. But it feels really like, there's your next book there, Rachel, right there. Not about the children, but, exactly, guidance for parents. So obviously you've got these 3 fabulous books, and we'll share the links, but it's better to get them, I think you were telling me, from Send Books rather than Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes. Amazon, the reason I went through Amazon is, firstly, it was easier to do that, and it also enabled me to get, believe it or not, they've sold in Australia, Canada, South America. They're all over the place. It's been really exciting. But I partnered with Send Books because the print quality of Send Books, I actually get them printed locally in Tuddenham Press. And they're absolutely lovely quality. And I've heard that the ones from Amazon have a tendency to be a little less wonderful quality. They're still a good book, but paper quality is not so great.
Well, I'll share the links to Send Books where people can get hold of them. So there's the Thing, My Brother Has a Thing, and It's a Panda Thing.
Yes, the It's a Panda Thing you can also get from the PDA Society. They have a link on their website. So if that's your flavour, and we often talk about these things in flavours, then the PDA Society have supported us with that book, and they have their little logo panda on the corner. That one.
That's brilliant, because actual information and support for parents who believe their child is on the autism spectrum with the PDA profile is enormously difficult.
Hard to come by. And actually a lot of the sales are of the PDA book, because there are so few books around on PDA. There are lots of books for adults, but very few books at the moment for young children. So that one was the 3rd stage of our journey. So
yeah, well, I love all of your books, Rachel, and super grateful to you for coming to speak with me today and share your experiences. So thanks so much for your time.
No problem at all. Thank you.
It's always so useful to hear from other parents who've been on the same journey as yourself, to hear their experiences and thoughts and reflections and ways in which they manage things that everybody finds difficult. So I hope that you found Rachel's insight useful there. I've shared here all the links that we talked about to the video of her son reading the book, and also to the Send Books, the link there for you to buy the books as opposed to going through Amazon. So I hope there was something useful in there for you, and I shall see you again very soon.